Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode. Oh my God, these songs are not the songs I want. Okay. The title of tonight's episode is How to Approach Metaphysical Landscapes. And so, in some sense, when any person begins speaking about what is occurring behind the eyes of the human being, one in some sense steps, hopefully my voice is loud enough, one simply steps into a domain of dynamism which could give unknown properties to any contained sort of structure. So, what I'm trying to tell you is that in front of our eyes, it's very easy to measure phenomena, but behind our eyes, it's not as easy. Now, many human beings in history have approached the mind of man. And their first early attempts of it was to, in some sense, try to contain the world into some sort of experiential meaning. Okay? I guess there's nothing to hold back. Every human being has to, in some sense, create the ladder towards their greatest awareness. Your greatest awareness, for speech's sake, we will call it your soul. The mind, I'm going to consider the bridge between the body and the soul. So if we were to play with these three dimensions, these three classifications of intelligence, pretty much there would be the known phenomena, which is your body, and then there will be the unknown phenomena, which is your soul, and then there is, in some sense, the dance between the known and the unknown, which is the mind. In some sense, when Aldous Huxley tells us there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception, he means that where perception is occurring is between what is known and what is unknown. That means our knowledge updates itself when there are new findings. Okay? There are ancient beliefs in our societies, but in some sense, science updates itself. The story of the world changes as the being changes. Now, the cool thing is that prior to studying what is occurring behind man's eyes, we approach studying what is in front of our eyes. That means man looked into the mirror before he looked into his mind. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is that first there was the establishment of the objective existence. Suddenly there was enough awareness for creatures to know there were creatures. Then as these creatures looked at one another, they began to have subjective modifications, and in some sense the objectivity seemed to echo. I honestly believe that it can be hypothesized that evolution began through a sort of awareness of self, so the self behaved in a way where a part of itself became aware of itself. So I don't know how to say this, how to mention this, but all I could say is there was an objective evolution, and then there was a subjective evolution. And in 2019, there is no living human being that I believe does not use any language. The moment we are people, we are already in a story. The moment we are anything, we are that thing in accordance to a reference. So fundamentally, when you go to look at what your mind is, you're going to see one aspect of your mind is the moment, but the other aspect of your mind is how, in some sense, uh, it's as if your soul is how would I say it? Your body is occurring in a certain dimension. Your mind is occurring in a way where the body as if is in the mind, for the mind. Okay? So the mind will take the position of the free will. When you're in front of your eyes, your free will is objective movement. Behind your eyes, the free will is subjective freedom. That means in one manner, your mind requires space to exist, and in another manner, your free will is certain patterns of motion in that space. Kind of like your metaphysical landscapes are being wondered about in physical landscapes. Pretty much when we wander beyond our sensory perception, imagination attempts to shape reality. When we discover imagination is the movement of the unknown, so it seems that we're going to recognize that our free will does not just move objects around. Our free will is also moving subjects into objects. Suddenly you look at an object and it's not just an object, it has become the cup in your cupboard, you know? So it's suddenly, there's a sort of subtler structuring laid upon meaningless phenomena. The phenomena is meaningless because just like time, we need to have a reference point. We need to have a coordinate. That means existence is never something that comes alone. It is in relation to something prior. This is why there's the whole philosophical debate over the Big Bang Theory. How could something come from nothing? In front of our eyes, reality seems to be an objective singular dimension. Behind our eyes, because we are observing intelligence is working through the attention of an observance. This attention of an observance, in some subtle way, is duplicating the world and is doing it in a place where it is malleable. So, in some cultures, they thought that there was just the body, and they thought the mind was the supreme body in the body. You see, it's always like the door behind the door that's fascinating for people. We want to see why the unknown is here. And that in some sense was the kind of inspiration for many human beings who thought about how the physical was contained. The moment you wonder about truly the physical reality, you will see it's hovering in the middle of nowhere. That means with the same miraculous force that your eyes open to see a world, with the same miraculous force, in some sense, imagination it comes to reality as its child. I consider imagination to be the aspects of my experience where in some sense there isn't control. I noticed this in the psychological kind of structure of the human being. I noticed it through behavior. You don't understand how much behavior is a representation of the attention of the individual. I saw that when people were taken to incredible intense states of confrontation, they reverted back to past personalities. So I noticed that because we are creatures of thought on some level, prior to being creatures of thought, we're creatures of attention. But before that, I got to speak about how we're creatures of thought. Because thoughts are actually important. Because when we wake up, believe it or not, what the day is like an empty piece of paper, and you're choosing how to write on it. Now, you don't want to do it all, and this is the kind of how beautiful it is that we're social creatures. Let me tell you why people cannot be responsible for the extinction. Not okay, that's too far. Maybe I'll say. I want to kind of suggest that the moment a person fails, their current personality dies. Any moment a personality dies, a way the person is choosing to be, a kind of reception of intelligence shifts. So every moment I have failed, trust me, some notion, some intensity of a vision in my experience has reduced. There has been a sort of death of the future potential. And so when that has occurred, what really happens is that you realize time is kind of pushing everybody past the finish line. Regardless of what I do, eventually I will get old, and time will pass, and time will pass beyond conception. When time passes beyond the conception of the being, it is very important, as the ancient mystics said, kind of like to die before you die. That means to get a full grasp of the intelligence that is here before the intelligence shifts again. Okay? Many people see the fact that we have evolved this far is a kind of testament to how life is being conducted over conscious living. So when I ask a person who are they, I mean, physically I see who they are. I could see their embodied aspects, but their disembodied aspects of their intelligence, in some sense, is left to how they animate what they are. So if you just forget people's values, people's stories, and just see life, you kind of see just phenomena. Okay, life starts at a level where it's just stuff is happening, and the reason we think stuff is happening is because we think we are stuff. Only stuff can know stuff. Something that's not made of stuff cannot know stuff. So we explore the metaphysical, and we approach it in a way with a full appreciation of our knowledge. That means when we went to the greatest teacher in this existence, which was a mirror, and we asked this mirror, we're like, mirror, what's the point of all this? The mirror was like, I'm showing you, do you see? And when man looked in the mirror, he saw himself. So he centered, in some sense, The whole world in front of himself, to himself. You see, it's like egos have a gravitational pull in regards to the uniqueness of the personality and what it draws in. Now, the moment language was in some sense generated, so I want you to think of the early human beings not being philosophers, just being people trying to communicate. Eventually, imagine they began to communicate. Somehow, the meaning underneath somehow found a way to be shared. That means communication was the effort of just creatures paying attention to the same stuff. What worlds dwell behind our eyes? Why has existence come so far? Human beings shared data for a long time before they wondered about the data they were sharing. What that means is the animal functioned due to its natural programming before it suddenly could even know that it was naturally here. This suggests that there's an involuntary kind of existential systematic approach. That means you don't think about your heart, but it beats. So when we look at where the free will actually exists, it cannot exist in the objective world. Did you know that? Because how could it? How could we say the the particles in space are free? They are bound to the laws of their universal sector, to the laws of the fields of their intelligence, to the forces of nature. They are bound. That means the moment I choose to just be an object, to be just a physical being, in some sense, there's no such thing as free will. It's all a hallucination of natural forces. As if the laws of motion or the laws of nature, in some sense, is dictating, is simulating free will, but it is not free. That is a tragic ending. That is like a human being who came to the movie theater, but instead of looking in front, it looked at the ground. So imagine you sitting on it for 2 hours of a movie, just looking at the ground instead of looking at the TV. That's what thinking we're just objective beings is like. We are devaluing the actual presence of the moment, which has an unknown element and a known element. I give science the full permission to study the known reality. Science is actually just is kind of like a is like a machine. What scientists are doing, computers will soon do. But what is animated out of an unknown kind of inspiration cannot be done by a machine. Do you know that means we managed to create robots that are like ourselves? But we have not created robots that can imagine. Okay? We have created robots that could be like advanced calculators. Like the human being can calculate 2 plus 2 equals 4. The robot has an instantaneous ability in regards to that. But when we see that uh, what surpasses the ability of measurement, calculation, and structure It is the dynamism of the changing world. That means if this world, if we were all living in a painting, I would totally believe that science could figure it out. But because the world is too animate, it is being animated in ways that surpasses the knowledge, the technology we build. So what that means is we use a telescope to, in some sense, see a far away kind of celestial object up close. Okay, so similarly, we're using language to contain this whole manifest phenomena, this wondrous unknown happening. For me, reality is like an unknown occurrence. It's kind of like opening your house door and being like, oh my God, it's raining. It's like you had no idea it was raining. You open it, the reality is just there. And the world appears to us in such a way where it's just there. Okay? It's like I see it in movies sometimes. The child's like, I didn't ask to be born. The child's get like is in an argument it can't confront. So the child's like, I didn't even want to be here. Like it's the easiest thing. It's kind of like the fight or flight attitude. Okay, and because we don't fight as intensely and we don't run away as intensely as like being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or fighting it. But in some sense, we try to change. It's like you don't understand. Whenever you talk to somebody else, a part of your subconscious is trying to see through their eyes, whether you like it or not. So the mind was compartmentalized. Carl Jung did this, okay? And so as the mind began getting segments, it began getting divided. It got divided between the known and the unknown. And that's why Carl Jung kind of focused on the archetypes of the collective unconscious. That means he understood the unknown factor in the equation of consciousness, in the equation of the mind. Because he understood the unknown factor, he realized a part of comprehending the greater levels of movements of intelligence on this planet is in some sense releasing yourself from the ways you contained it. You see, the universe is being contained in incredible amount of ways. That's what a belief is, by the way. Belief is kind of like some guy trying to fit the ocean in a cup. He's like, I believe this is the truth and nothing else. It's like, good for you, man. Good for you for choosing to put all of this changing universe, this expanding universe, this phenomena that's here, all into an idea. Good job. For me, religions were incredible, but when you use religion out of context, you devalue what it was made for. Religion was a solution to people's personal dimension. It was because science did not have a loud existence in society. It had probably a subtle, quiet existence. So you don't understand. So many technologies have a life cycle. They remain dormant until they are evoked and in some sense unleashed. So think of it this way, that when Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone, or when Edison suddenly externalized the light bulb that went on in his head, we have to value what is here or we will not want to be here. That's the issue. It's kind of like the person not cleaning their room for a while and eventually is like, why am I existing in this mess? Okay? So similarly, when we look at civilization, it is a vast accumulation of various entities. It is a collective artwork. That's what society is. And every living being is an artist. It doesn't matter, trust me. Eventually, we will tap into the global mind. And you know what it would be? This global institution I'm kind of speaking about, it's not an institution, it's just this vision I have that this is going to be how cool the world is. We're going to realize the value of how far we've come in our ancestors' decisions. And so we're going to realize the reason a lot of violence and disturbance occurs in society is because people are different from one another and they can't be in the same room as one another. But unfortunately, because we're all on a planet, we have no choice. So eventually, any sort of movement that grows will have to integrate. This is a law. It's like you can't shout in the streets and assume nobody's gonna hear. So eventually, as there comes more acceleration of movement and communication, as communication evolves, eventually there will come the necessity for a global community, because there could be a child born in Africa whose ideas and thoughts and visions could be exactly what a community of adults in Europe are waiting for. We saw that. I remember seeing this kid from like Africa kind of go to MIT and kind of like impress him. This 11-year-old kid, who would build stuff from wreckage. I'm telling you, it's as if what's going to happen. It's going to be like, I want you to imagine all the nations right now, all the various countries, as a sort of first floor. On the first floor of this giant mansion, these are all one room. These are all separate rooms. But I want you to imagine there's ways to the second floor, where the second floor of this building is a complete hall. No longer there's rooms. No longer it's. I don't know. 20 years is too soon. I think. Like, I'd be even surprised if it's in 20 years this happens. But if it does, I'll be like, word. We live for a challenge, but realize as we confront the challenge, we have to let go of the past. So we also live. It's like that kind of gray movie, Live and Die on This Day. So you suddenly realize every moment of your attention shifting is a new way that the personality can move. Your attention is your life. And trust me, when you don't pay attention to your life, you forget it and you ignore it, and suddenly you devalue things. That's kind of one of those properties of the mind, that when you see somebody, you don't see them through their eyes, so you don't know their value. So you have access to how your experiences give meaning and color to that person you see. So we have to study the data we are. Pretty much that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, even a scientist can understand how mysticism is a completely rational notion. Spirit, like meditation, makes perfect sense. It is not just something some ancient people did. Meditation is, in some sense, the recognition that let's say we wondered, we did all the science experiments possible. Eventually, after exploring fully the external realm, even though it's impossible because it's endlessly vast, but let's say somehow we studied the external realm, we will eventually wonder what is there. So because of this, it's very funny. I call this the law of boredom. Whenever you reach the top of the mountain, okay, you can't stay there forever. I mean, you're like, okay, I attained a sort of level of success. Now time to move on. And so that move on factor is actually one of the greatest feelings in this life. You have to understand that things change. Charles Darwin gave a very important clue to human beings. He's like, guys, the one who adjusts, in some sense, continues. So we see that intelligence continues due to its flexibility, but we also notice something unique. Okay, we notice something unique, that why is it that, for example, certain ancient ideas have continued? Like, there's been so many people in the history of humanity. Why do the words of certain writers reach our ears? Why did the words of certain ideologies from thousands of years ago still echo in our libraries? Of course, it is on some level we have to, in some sense, bow to all the scribes of humanity, but at the same time, we have to wonder that it is perhaps the value of the vision. So what I see is that, how many human beings they have existed on this plane. Imagine every human being that has existed has been a memory for the planet. And the planet is filled with these endless memories, constantly reconceptualizing, constantly civilizations rising and falling, and after, millions of years departing. Western part of the world values freedom more than discipline. The eastern part of the world values discipline more than freedom. But both don't recognize that they're on the two sides of the same coin. Of the same coin. So I guess I could do something in this talk that I kind of wished the teachers in our educational system would do. And that is to recognize that in front of your eyes, you are trying to find an answer, but behind your eyes, you got to ask the right question. You got to study the movement of your attention. So that means if, like, let's say a parent wants to see what happened to the child in school, okay? That parent should go to the child and be like, hey, Billy, be like, hey, Billy, you know, what, like, the parent asks, how did your attention move throughout the day? And when you look at your attention, you have lived a totally different day. When you live as a moment of attention, as a creature of attention, prior to creature of thought. Trust me, I tried this. I tried this one day. I decided to walk in an empty world. Pretty much that day, I had no thought on anything. Stuff was just happening, and there was no value given to it. And I recognize, okay, the mind can totally do this. The mind can totally be so still and silent that its presence overthrows its conscious doership, which is an animation of its inability to be still. Do you know when you become really still and silent? Just imagine you became still and silent completely. Now I want you to imagine any human being who can just sit still and silent for 20 minutes and not do a single thing. No teaching, no philosophy, nothing. Forget any idea you know. And just sit still and silent for 20 minutes. I recommend to do this in nature. And just watch. Just watch life as if you're a newborn baby. What I mean is that I want you to kind of recognize the value of novelty. When a person doesn't feel that the creative dimension is properly evoked in their experience, they have to reshape, they have to recognize that what they're paying attention to is being their world. So what that means is you can't go beside a dumpster and be like, I don't smell roses here. So you can't, or in some sense, you can't push a building. You got to recognize how the world is moving. That means many people I've noticed in society, you care for behavior and its progress in regards to a collective value. That means it's like what I've seen in so many cultures, whether it was in Iran or whether it was in Canada, whenever there was a problem, people help. People help. It's in our nature. It's like you see like some person you see the younger version of yourself in, you give that person the opportunity you wish you had. Wisdom is a process of communication that preserves the clearest vision of reality. That is it. We are just, on some level, scientifically, we're sophisticated. We're advanced apes making sophisticated mouth noises. Or actually, advanced chimpanzees or whatever. Like, so I'm kind of saying, like, what if the identity was multidimensional, and what would that mean? What would the multidimensional kind of setting of intelligence be? We will see it will divide into the objective and subjective, but then the subjective, which is the kind of we want to focus on the subjective because it's like we're wondering about what is behind our eyes. The subjective is a reflection through the objective. That means, for me, people never worshipped anything outside themselves. When a person worshipped oh, when the person worshipped like a wooden idol back in the day, like in pantheism, where people saw God as actual physical nature, like a piece of wood with feathers on it could be a god. Okay, what it was is that that piece of wood, people knew it was a piece of wood, but how they saw it was where the divinity was occurring. So I'm kind of telling you, a lot of life, it seems external. So what happens is subjectivity comes across as a metaphysical landscape because it is an it's an addition to physical reality. It is like an extra data we're getting access to. The fact that I could wonder, okay, tomorrow I could do that, or I could do something else, or all the various things, all the various kind of routes. So in some sense, you begin to see as like some people believe Carl Jung created maps to the mind, to the collective unconscious in some sense. But I feel what he did was kind of he couldn't have had enough time. It's because I wouldn't even my lifetime would not be, if I dedicated my whole lifetime to this, it would not be enough because it will require collective patterns of exploration occurring. Right now we care for our bodies more than our minds because we feel if our bodies are not taken care of, our minds cannot be. And on some level that is true, but the notion is that we're not here to live a programmed kind of loop kind of life, okay? We are here to move beyond our orbit. So I want whoever you are just listening right now, I want you to understand that you have a freedom that you have had ever since you've opened your eyes in this existence. It is the freedom of ascribing value to something that has no value before. And the world has so much value, and so much of its value is given. Do you know it's spoon fed? The child goes in the street, sees people being violent, suddenly a value of the world has been spoon fed into its subconscious. It sees the world as a tough place. So, first grade realization comes. The collective self is as valuable as the individual self. Any groups of entities forget their collective self, they in some sense will feel they will have no reason for being. We are like puzzle pieces that in some sense must fit in. And the greatest way, sorry guys, it's like sometimes I have like an allergic situation going on or something of the sort. So so excuse the additional noises, but for me it's the concepts that should take your attention more than any noise. So right now, if you ask me, Mr. Within, how do you explore your metaphysical landscape? Your metaphysical landscape, I would say that I do it based on an acknowledgement of how waves of data accumulated as layers of reality. So what that means is I notice this, for example, in parties where I've drank before, or experienced altered states of consciousness, what occurs is that I recognize the reversion to youthful to patterns of memory. So you see, I don't know how many people have actually just sat still and silent and watched their thoughts. I think most people feel that meditation is like, you shouldn't have thoughts, bro. If you have thoughts, you're doing it wrong. Like it's not, it's not. That is so inaccurate. That is the worst response. The point is, you're not meant to not have thoughts. That's impossible. Somebody could come and tell you, don't think about an apple. So the moment they say apple, the mind has an instantaneous reactive image, uh, manifestation kind of intelligence to it. That means if I say right now, like, imagine like a dragon in the sky, but it's a robotic dragon. Okay, so like when I say that concept, the words bring images. The words together bring one image. So if you notice when somebody gives a talk, as each word arises, there is an addition. There is a subjective expansion of that universe. So what I'm trying to say is that the way I approach it is that I tried to control truth. I did. Because it was one of those kind of like naiveties where like I felt that truth was only in my eyes. I felt that I thought it's like, how can I say it? Socrates says it best, like I feel he went up a similar ladder. He said, the only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing. You know why? Because the magnitude, the size, the vastness of the ultimate reality will mean the disappearance of this. Anytime you seek a world beyond, what happens is the mind is seeking something else. So in other words, like for example, somebody coming and saying, I'm a spiritual person, bro. Like what that means is a part of their subconscious is inclined to considering beyond the objective. It's kind of like free will is a movement. That's what I'm telling you. In complete stillness and silence, there is no free will because there's no identification with a being. Like guys, it's too unique. I find it incredibly mysterious, regardless of how much knowledge human beings have found, regardless of what kind of answers we got, even from antiquity or modern times. We are on a rock in the middle of nowhere. We are too uniquely designed as a creature. Okay, this doesn't mean there's a designer, but it doesn't also mean there isn't. It means that we are in a situation where there's blanks, where there's unknown factors. So humanity's first kind of inner revolution is in some sense a recognition that, oh my God, we do have minds and these minds are unknown, rather than constantly trying to belief it up. A belief does not add anything to the world. It's a hope. That's what belief is. It's a kind of risk. Imagine I say I believe that like this iced cappuccino in front of me is the truth. Okay? Now you come to me and say, "Oh my God, you believe an iced cappuccino is the ultimate truth?" And I will tell you, let's say I believe. I'm telling you, I believe this iced cappuccino is the ultimate savior of everything. You would, in some sense, look at me and you will see that the mind will see what it wants to see. True skill comes in, true wisdom comes in when the person recognizes beyond their wants. That means you suddenly find a pure ambition. This means a kind of true value of life prior to any engagement, or it's kind of like, you know how they said you like there was a like they asked this quantum physicist, like, tell us about the results of recent like quantum kind of experiments and whatnot. And he's like, bro, listen, it's kind of like we took a tiger from the forest, a cheetah from the forest, and from its natural habitat, we put it in a cage, and now we're measuring the cheetah in the cage, and we're saying we found something. And I was like, wow. I don't know who it was. I think the last name of the physicist, quantum physicist, could have been Bohr, Bohr. But I could be off. But I'm definitely sure it was definitely a quantum theorist or physicist who said. Anyways, what the notion means is that we have taken ourselves out of our nature to experience something beyond nature. What we experience beyond nature, we create it, so we dwell, our attention tends to dwell in what is real and what is has our movement in it. Human beings are kind of like we transcended even the lion in the forest, the king of the animals. We stood higher than the king of the animals. And when you see a lion, you see a lion doesn't go eat food that it hasn't killed. Strange. But is it? It is as if it carries a pride, as if it doesn't do the action, it will not be certain. Okay? So it's as if in this life we find people have to do things themselves to update themselves to themselves. So in some sense, external reality has a personal kind of ignition, group mob mentality. Like, that's nonsense. There's no super duper enlightenment teaching. That is like it is not meant for a human being. No human being has gotten enlightened because the notion of enlightenment was inconceivable. It was not a picture. You're not becoming a shape. The awareness of shape has found a freedom prior to the shape's origin. Pretty much, you remember a moment where you were just a moment prior to being anything. So eventually you'll its imagination, but then it's going to see its imagination will appear as another reality. So the mind has to find contentment with non-existence. So it's very unique. Pretty much what happens is it's kind of like when a person wonders about what they are, which is pretty much the whole meditative directive. And of course, when we want to explore metaphysical landscapes, we're pretty much wondering about the values of the world we have kind of placed behind in the background of the world of the world. Free the world from yourself. And as you forget that self, as Zen Master Dogen says, you will awaken to the nature of all things. You will awaken as nature being all things. You will awaken to the voluntary being in the involuntary. So in some sense, you're going to recognize your free will and nature's processes have a yin-yang relationship. As if, imagine, instead of white and black, it was nature, it was unconscious nature and the conscious free will. We would see a bit of the unknown in the conscious free will, and we would see a bit of the conscious free will in the unknown. The conscious free will that we see in the unknown, incredibly, for some strange reason, religious, through a revelatory behavioral pattern, it was discovered. I don't know how. Sometimes I don't doubt religion because I'm like, why does the idea exist? Why did the attention to the phenomenology carry so long? And for me, everything that has lived on to this point first deserves a kind of high five. That means, in some sense, the worst idea of 2019 is ahead of every great idea before it. It has continued. We don't understand. It's kind of like you realizing that life is meant to be performed. That means you are meant to be aware pre-formed. Metaphysical landscapes will kind of, it's like when anything imagined becomes too real, it will feel like a memory from another time. So you gotta understand, it's like the Rig Veda said that your mind is a slave to the real. Like they said, the mind is a slave to the real. What that means is that your identity, your free will. It's kind of like the left hemisphere of your brain attempting to conceptualize through the frontal lobe. An analytical approach to a structured view. Pretty much a part of you is trying to shape life, and a part of you is watching, and being the space where that shape is occurring. So what's going to happen is that as you go explore your metaphysical landscapes, it's kind of very unique. Your attention will become a sieve. Your memories will be a sieve for how your attention pours data uh, here I could say it into the awareness sphere. The mind is phenomenal because it hasn't opened its wings yet. We haven't understood the value of flowing with rhythms of a universal presence. And I think in the future, people are going to kind of hear my talks. Imagine my talks continue 10,000 years from now. They're going to hear it and they're going to be like, man, our ancestors were comedians. The world has to be reduced, it's like from the hopelessness of failure, nothing returns you towards success more than playfulness. I have this attitude every time I fail, it's like it's comedy in the making. I'm like, at least this is good comedy. Like for myself, you know? And then moments that I succeed, it's kind of like it's a very important moment for me because in the moments that I succeed, it's like past notions of myself suddenly fulfill their existence and disappear. If you notice when you achieve something, there's a release. You know what that release is? That release is not just objective tension. That release is a release from certain ideas that were defining you since your childhood. And when you truly go within what is without reanimates, I'm telling you, we have to honor reality and we have to honor sobriety. That's something the Western part of the world needs to understand. It took us 4 billion years to evolve to a sober state of mind. Now, the state of mind is constantly changing, so it's kind of like history is like how the world is hallucinating humanity. Okay, maybe that's too heavy, but the notion is that we approach the unknown without an attachment to what we know. Then what we know is flexible enough to extend in new ways. Eventually, your knowledge, your honest search of truth will come down to you recognizing the eyes that you're holding. What that means is when I say the eyes that you're holding, the moment you're an individually conscious entity, you think you are like one thought. You are not. There's a river of phenomena, subtler phenomena. I've kind of I use this sort of terminology because what the only thing we have in some sense to kind of move as a lantern in this fog of the unknown imagination is language. Language is kind of like an instrument that, if played right, the greatest potentials are possible. If not played properly, in some sense, it will be disastrous. Freedom will come to be to have an unknown edge. Pretty much what happens, I find, through the most supreme experiences, that means if there were any human being on this planet that had an experience that they considered life-changing, is because it changed the values or how their experience had a value. Okay, this is, whenever this changes, something very unique happens. Your attention finds more room it can move in. It's like if you notice, the body can become dirty, okay? And then there's a sort of kind of like, how can I say it? You got to shower every day. I'm saying this to the world because it's kind of important to even communicate with the water element. What you do today is like, I went underneath a waterfall and I sat for 3 hours. And then his friend's like, why, bro? Why? And the guy would be like, to see how far the free will can go. And the free will can go to points that if it is not ready to move on, it will keep the world where it is. You have to be honest, and then your mind reveals its true nature. If you're dishonest to yourself in any percentage, like if you're even 0.01% dishonest, you're going to see, you will feel like there's something you're not letting yourself see. That's the problem of not confronting fear. Anytime fear has arose in my mind, anytime a challenge has occurred, I was like, okay, something's approached, something's happening. And nature is very important, because prior to even word establishing, it has an intelligent movement. As our minds, which have subjectified or storified into characters, we will, in some sense, these characters will find a dissolution, an archetypal dissolution. It's very incredible. It's like, just like how the body, when the person passes away, decomposes, and suddenly these atoms and particles, in some sense, cease to exist. Okay, similarly, the mind, this notion of a person, will break down into archetypes, which are memories of personhood from various worlds and rooms. Okay, and some of them are going to be known, they're going to be kept in known ways, and some of it is going to be kept in unknown ways. And this is the true unknown of the mind. Because there's an unknown aspect to the observer, and then there's an unknown aspect to the objects of observance. Okay, so if our educational systems came and said, okay, this is the situation, guys, this is what we're teaching you. There's an objective reality, and then there's a subjective reality. Okay, and in the objective reality, we use evidence and reference points and dualistic kind of context to kind of make sense of things. But internally and in the subjective realm, even though subjects also relate to dualism, it's like the eyes that see the world is one angle, and the world that has, in some sense, opened these eyes is another. So it's kind of like the world has created you, which have now are creating the world in value behind your eyes. It's all imagery evocation on a subtler field. It is like Rene Descartes caught onto it. For me, I have in some sense kind of like played around with Rene Descartes' kind of stories of contemplation, but in some sense, he's a man I honor, but I can't, because my intentions are not to just keep man in a sort of dualism of the mind and body. For me, it's like novelty is the supreme law. Imagine somebody said, I believe in God, but this God is called novelty. It is the new. It can never be defined because it has not arrived. Or it arrives in every moment. It changes. For me, I realized something. The mind, your attention, Like literally right now, you have an attention, for example, to this live stream. But your attention is the steering wheel of meaning. And how you govern your attention and how much you choose to observe it as the observer or how much you choose to be an object of observance. Anytime you think you are based on something else, you, in some sense, your faith in form becomes an unknown phenomenon. So it's very incredible. It's like the person suddenly knows a lot because they know how they are knowing things. And it's in an unknown abidance. This is what the mystics and yogis understood. This is the only way pretty much Carl Jung understood it too. He just came and westernized it a bit to bring the audience towards an ability to eventually recognize that the whole point of the collective unconscious, or what the collective unconscious implies, is its opposite, which is not its opposite, but its symmetrical reflection, which is the collective conscious. So what that means is it is the collective, efficient, integrative, rhythmic movement of members of this species. You see, we look at birds, they fly in groups. They fly in the sky in waves and unique formations. When we look at, in some sense, fish under the water, we see the schools of fish move as if they're like a huge fish. Okay? We see creatures, we see animals constantly trying to be together a greater being. We're going to see it's like we looked for God and we realized it was the greatest possible outcome of all of us. So what that means is God is no longer a shape to fight over. Nobody can own the concept of God. Nobody can define it. Because if they define it, they are choosing to do something that the idea of God has to do. That means only God knows what God is. So any person who has an opinion on God will in some sense be having an opinion on their known bubble, their bubble of knowledge. It's very cute when your bubble of knowledge bursts because suddenly you realize the world is an illusion. The world is a simulation of attention, of how your attention has sculpted matter into subjective meaning. So the question comes, and let's deepen the value of the question. Because for me, it's honestly, if we don't ask the right question, our answers will be hollow. It's very fascinating that our actions define us. It's very fascinating because when we do an action, we have a personal observance of it, but others have also their own personal, which lies in our impersonal. So your unconscious is the space for other conscious minds. You see? So I want you to say the way I'm speaking about the depths of man's mind and the deepest findings of the approach towards the metaphysical landscape is that we're going to realize the unknown factor of all of us is same. That means what we have what we all have in common as a species is that none of us know anything about the world yet. We know some things, but we don't know shit. So that's what we have in common. None of us know. And this doesn't mean none of us know. This simply means we don't know enough, which simply means that the educational system has one task. Just like the Survey Corps in Attack on Titan, enslaving the future to tradition. We protect the past by demonstrating such a freedom. That means, trust me, live one day when anything happens, you give freedom to the situation. You give ultimate freedom. Just have this mentality tried for one day. Okay? One day, for one day, just any situation, any conflict happens, when the other person, any person in your sphere of whatever incident is occurring, anything happens, give them complete freedom. Okay? That means begin communicating with the human race without judgment of any value, and let the values be conducted and created out of only people's actions. That means don't believe words. See how the attention of various beings on this planet is moving. That's the greatest thing I could tell you. Study yourself as if you are it. Seek truth as if truth, the idea of it, is something that's in your sight. It is it. A part of me believes, like, I don't believe I'm alone in regards to caring for the unknown aspects of the mind. I just feel that society is one of those things that it is stuck in a counterculture mode, and that kind of loop of constantly reacting to reality is that it's like you can't have all human beings agreeing to one thing forever. This is impossible. It's a mistake to also happen. But what will happen is that people will agree to a value. You see, it's like ideas prior to being created are created out of values, and values are a sort of change. So you see, the most beautiful words of literature, in certain texts, if you read, just like the greatest sentences I've seen, they have been passages of time. It's as if I've read a sentence, and in that sentence I experienced a lifetime. The implication of where the world is a testament to how much the person is choosing to be self-aware. That means if somebody comes and tells you, "Hey man, can you be aware of yourself?" and you're like, "Sure," but then you wonder, how can you be aware of yourself? And you suddenly become aware that you are awareness, and then you become aware that phenomena is happening, and so you suddenly come to what I like to say, into that station, into that state of mind where you are attention, a moment of attention, just being, an attributeless presence of attention. And as you move, as sensory data even is accessed, reality begins to have deeper stories to it. So the metaphysical landscape is a question of the extension of the greatest internal technologies we have. So it's in some sense a kind of approach where we're saying, okay, external technology has been exponentially growing, moving towards a singularity where at some point robots will we will be the inferior species. Like that's the fear aspect of technology. But similarly, I'm saying the internal technology is also, it is evolving, and it's in its evolution. It's not just the sense of self that changes, it is the world that that self brings. You cannot have character without a world that that character exists in. So if somebody asks you who you are and you have an individual notion that you can kind of speak about that is you, or what you in some sense communicate to be you, you begin to see that is never it. What it is that language is beautiful, but it is also beautifully hollow. It's like kind of, you can say the deeper revelatory gazes upon this earth are kind of like a sort of recognition that all the words on the empty, it's like remembering the empty page where all the words were written in. So in some sense, the way your value system has been designed, its design remembers the empty page. When it remembers the empty page, so for me personally, this was a moment before thought. Before I spoke, I had an early moment in my childhood where I didn't know language and I was just present. Present as sight. This presence of sight was more supreme to any definition that was later accumulated by my intelligence and exposure to life. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we are here first by being the here and now. We are being the world in which the self is then being to be us. We don't realize it, but subjectively, that's why we have an imagination. Imagination is a nation of images where the borders are unknown. You don't understand how many thoughts have moved through my mind. I've just sat indoors, I'm like lying in my bed, kind of bored, but suddenly I have waves, these kind of winds. For me, thoughts are like these different intensity winds. Sometimes these winds move at very high speeds. When the thought moves really as a fast speed, there's a certain point you can hold on to it, but then you can't, and it transforms into an image. So you see, they say that people think through words and they think through images. Okay, so what that means is the kind of what we're getting from this sort of notion of our intelligence, our mind, is an ability to animate what could be. Okay, and so this ability of wonder, of future projection, of potential or possibility is kind of like, because it's ahead of our time, we're wondering what it's going to be like. It's kind of like in the domain of imagination. Any spiritual practice that does not bring the attention of the individual towards the linguistic simulation prior to the existential simulation, it's a disservice. Oh man. So imagine right now I say the word apple. Now imagine when every time I say apple, the thought of the image of an apple comes. Now imagine somebody was like apple, 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 and imagine that person kept somehow saying apple quicker, quicker, more quicker, more quicker, eventually reaching a speed that person is saying apple, apple, apple more, even faster than the speed of sound. You suddenly begin to see it's as if there comes a disappearance of higher speeds, as if it's like when something accelerates, it accelerates to a point where it cannot be in just the same dimension. So I personally believe that our visions are how our imagination is. These sort of, they emerge through language, as if our imagination is like this kind of unconscious kind of power, this force, and it is our reality in which the free will stands in, which in some sense tries to contain and classify the unknown. So every person has a relationship with the known and has a relationship with the unknown. The relationship with the unknown it tends to be a personal one. If it's impersonal, it ends up being weird. It becomes like cult-like and it's unnecessary. We are not in a ceremonial era. Any person who is stuck into doing some sort of ceremony to attain some sort of esoteric insight, that is nonsense. I'm telling you, that's Halloween. Just do it on Halloween. Because Buddha understood this. Buddha understood it's not a ceremonial approach to truth, even though many things in this reality are cyclical. This is why the shaman, even certain shamans, had visions that the world will no longer need the shaman, which in some sense would mean that society will no longer need a subconscious mind. Will longer the unknown. The unknown was slowly being forgotten. And it's very chaotic, guys, because look at what knowledge is doing. Knowledge is a sort of putting the world in a container. So it's a sort of mechanism of a machine that is constantly containing things. Okay? So this machine that is containing things, it has had victims. And so it's very funny because this is where it is. It was first like the religious. Okay, so suddenly superstition, as Friedrich Nietzsche said, kind of God is dead. Okay, so the notion of God went away. Okay, not, it didn't go away, but you know what I'm saying. Like in some sense, man no longer valued it the same, or at least the secular European society. And so what happened is that after that, it's kind of like first there was the religious kind of who believed in the unknown, kind of was went under siege by kind of a rational approach like that. Ethos is under attack. Then it will be the philosophy. The philosophers are going to be then massacred, and then in some sense, this is conceptually and playfully I'm saying, by the way. Like there's no need for people to just, I'm saying these playfully. I'm trying to say the notion that it was as if a certain thought stopped being active in the minds of beings. The attention of people left certain values. Okay? And so that's what I mean by when I said massacre. I mean like a sort of destruction of a sort of way the world was kept as a value. Okay? And so this, in the religious mindset, there was a siege on it. And similarly, it will be the religious person where the unknown will be, in some sense, trying to be kind of destroyed in their eyes. And then it's going to be the philosophers, and then it's going to be the artists. But you're going to realize, and before the philosophers, it's going to be the poets. Okay? So, so in some sense, you're going to see a sort of very unique notion of uh, kind of destruction of the unknown because the known has to constantly define things only out of itself. It's as if you don't know, you haven't asked somebody about if they did something or not, but you're getting angry at them before you know if they did it or not. It's a sort of assumption prior to clarity. Oh, that's good juice. Let's say right now, a person on this planet, a human being on this planet, suddenly sees, let's say a child will be born in like, I don't know, let's say 20 years. This child will open his eyes and see a way where the world can be, all of it in an incredible way. He will see he cannot approach it